Hey there! I know this is going to sound a bit crazy, more so than usual, but I am certain that I have found a second retcon in the story, and it revolves around FNaF World. This theory will end up going to some very strange places, but as always, please hear me out, especially since this might be my strangest theory yet. That said, I want to preface this by saying that while this video's evidence can certainly be a bit looser than I'd normally like, I found this theory compelling enough to convince me to make it now rather than waiting for more details to possibly eventually come out. Without wasting too much more time, let's get started. The first question that we have to ask ourselves is what exactly is FNaF World meant to be? The reason I say this is because I've noticed something very strange about this game and its current place in the franchise. The game itself doesn't really tell us much, especially given how meta the entire thing is, but thankfully we can get a few interesting comments about it from the infamous Ultimate Guide and Character Encyclopedia books. While these books are understandably looked down upon due to the various editing errors within them, please listen to what they have to say here, as I have reason to believe that they are crucial to understanding this game. In the Character Encyclopedia, on the page discussing Dee Dee, we get the line, "She first appeared as an NPC in FNaF World, an online RPG version of Five Nights at Freddy's that has since been taken offline." Next, if we look to the Ultimate Guide, we get these comments under the section about Help Wanted. FNaF World has been ruled as existing outside of FNaF's canon, but that doesn't mean the game as a game isn't canonical. And, is Scott Cawthon canon? Scott is confirmed to portray the indie developer referenced in the opening, but Scott himself is not canon. This second quote can be directly backed up by a comment by Scott on Reddit, which I'll get to later, as it'll be very important. So, what was the point in looking at these quotes? Well, the idea that FNaF World was an in-universe game, as presented here, is directly supported by another seemingly in-universe game, Five Laps at Freddy's. As a side note, the idea that Five Laps at Freddy's is an in-universe game can be found on the game's Steam page, which has lines referencing it being a product of Fazbear Entertainment, particularly the first few lines of the description, which read, "Welcome to Five Laps at Freddy's, the premier animatronic kart racing circuit featuring your favorite and lovable Fazbear friends, sponsored by Fazbear Entertainment." In the game, or currently its demo, you can race through Fazbear Hills from FNaF World, and the course has this description. Race down the sunny roads of Animatronica's famous hills. Experience the thrills of the outdoors as you make your way through this classic locale. All three sources mentioned so far, the Character Encyclopedia, the Ultimate Guide, and Five Laps at Freddy's, all seem to be directly pointing at the idea that FNaF World's current canonical status is as an actual video game. So, where's that retcon I mentioned? Well, it starts with a 3D overworld the game got in Update 1. Whenever FNaF World was first released, the trailer depicted the game as having a 3D overworld. However, upon the actual release of the game, this was replaced with an old-school pixelated overworld. Scott then commented on this change on the Steam forums for the game, saying, "All of the screenshots and videos on Steam show the pixelated overworld. The 3D overworld was just an early concept shot, but it didn't match the story or gameplay, so it was replaced." Despite this, when Update 1 ended up coming out, we ended up getting the 3D overworld anyways. So what? Is the 3D overworld non-canon and just for gameplay purposes? Well, here's where things start to go off the rails, because I have various reasons to think that it's just the tip of the iceberg here. While I could just point to the light reflection on the screen, which suggests the idea that what we're seeing when we're in the overworld is what an in-universe player is also seeing, I can take this one step further. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we need to talk about Help Wanted. Remember that Scott quote I mentioned earlier? Well, now it's time to read it, and heads up, while it's a bit long, it will be very important to keep in mind. Hey everyone, so I received an email from a Reddit member yesterday asking me to clarify something specific about the lore of Help Wanted. He was very polite and respectful with this question, which I appreciate, and I know it's something that more than a few other users were confused about as well. So here I am to set the record straight, and probably create more confusion in the process. The question is this: is Scott Cawthon now a part of FNaF lore? My short answer is no. My name is never actually mentioned in the game. The game says that an indie developer was tarnishing the brand of Fazbear Entertainment by making video games about them, forcing them to rebrand and try to reclaim their good name by making a VR game that made light of those crazy stories. Or was it all part of the plan? Yes, I used my own picture for this indie developer because it's an obvious parallel, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually me in universe. On the surface, this might seem like an odd choice for a storyline in general, but there was a very, very specific challenge when making Help Wanted. The challenge was this: how do you take characters that are canon, along with characters that are questionably canon, and characters from every point of the timeline, and throw them all together in one game that is canon? That's quite the problem when you think about it, but it was important for me that Help Wanted means something. I didn't just want a meaningless collection of minigames, although I'm sure most people would have been okay with that. I wanted it to be canon, and that meant I needed to solve the substantial puzzle of how. And now that you all know the problem, maybe you can understand my approach. That doesn't mean you have to agree that it was a good idea. I keep a bowl of candy out for people who show up with torches and pitchforks at my front door. So no, I'm not canon. Reddit isn't canon. The fan games aren't canon. You aren't canon. Only the existence of a game developer that supposedly made video games based on actual events that may or may not be a cover-up by Fazbear Entertainment is canon. Alright, like I said, that was a lot to get through. So what does it have to do with FNaF World? Well, what other in-universe game do we have that features a mix of characters that are canon, along with characters that are questionably canon, and characters from every point of the timeline? That features a game developer who is represented by Scott Cawthon, and that never refers to him as Scott Cawthon. FNaF World. So, before we unpack the wild implications of that statement, we first need to talk about Help Wanted. Not the game again, but rather the short story from Tales from the Pizzaplex. After all, if I don't mention it while talking about the indie game developer, I'm certain someone in the comments will. Many people's current consensus is that the indie game developer portrayed by Scott is Steve Snodgrass, the protagonist of this short story, due to the story being about Fazbear Entertainment hiring an indie game developer to make 4 games for them that make light of their past, and the story literally being called Help Wanted. Unfortunately, while this is the point where I'd like to tell you that the story has some glaring issue that makes it a clear red herring, unless I'm missing something, I don't have that here. So instead, I'm going to go about this differently. Rather than provide you with evidence as to why this story is wrong, I'm going to give you a better alternative answer. With the elephant in the room addressed, let's get back to FNaF World. Now that I've made it clear that I believe the indie game developer to be the developer of FNaF World, let's start to actually unpack what that means and how it relates to Help Wanted. Specifically, how it recontextualizes things that were likely once intended to be nothing more than meta jokes about the series and turns them into important pieces of lore. To do this, we're going to have to talk about the weakest parts of this before building up to what is potentially the most important, starting with Coffee and Chipper. Obviously, both of these are from games made by the actual Scott Cawthon, those being The Desolate Hope and Chipper & Sons Lumber Co. But, surprisingly enough, both of these characters end up returning to the franchise at later points. I'm sure most people in the community are already aware of L Chips from both Pizzeria Simulator and Security Breach, but what you might not know is that Coffee actually makes a cameo appearance in the FNaF 3 levels of Help Wanted. Ramping up from here, I already lightly mentioned how FNaF World shares the same challenge that Help Wanted does narratively, of showcasing characters that either should not be common knowledge or who are questionably canon. What I didn't mention is the implication of this. If we assume FNaF World to be a project by the indie dev prior to the events of Help Wanted, it would mean a couple of interesting things. For starters, it would mean that in the case of canonical characters whose existence should be mostly unknown, such as pretty much anyone from FNaF 3 or 4, FNaF World's developer would also have to be getting information from the same source that Help Wanted's devs did, Fazbear Entertainment, LLC. Likewise, in the case of the dubiously canon characters, such as Jacko Bonnie and Jacko Chica, if we suggest that these were game-exclusive creations of the indie dev, as suggested by their FNaF World dialogue that directly mentions the existence of a Halloween update, it explains their appearance in Help Wanted despite them not being canon. Taking this another step further, remember how I mentioned the character encyclopedia called this an online RPG that has since been taken offline? Well, this would also explain how the player of FNaF World is able to interact with the game and its developer, the Deskman, over the course of updates 1 and 2. This isn't an offline single player game, but rather an online one. But the most interesting implication out of all of these has to do with Update 2's ending. After we defeat Chica's Magic Rainbow, we speak with the Deskman one last time, and he says this to us before dying. "I'm impressed. What are you doing here? Can't you see that I'm busy? You deactivated my games? I didn't know what else to do. I don't want to disappoint people, but my mind isn't right. I've made something terrible. Her name is Baby. It's too late to deactivate her. I'm sorry." Now, for a while, it seemed that this was a solely meta ending, with the Deskman being a dramatized representation of Scott talking about his struggles with keeping the fans happy while also foreshadowing Baby, who he seems to have been referring to in this Steam comment around a few weeks before Update 2 released. I've only had nightmares about 2 animatronics. One was Bonnie from FNaF 1. The other is... I can't talk about her yet, but she scares me. A lot. While I believe that the Deskman is now meant to represent the indie dev, this seemingly gives us an issue. We know that Baby was made by William Afton, and even if he had someone else program her, it wouldn't make sense for that to happen following the events of Pizzeria Simulator, which is when Fazbear Entertainment LLC would have had to hire the indie dev. That would be way too late in the timeline. Well, I have an answer to that issue. Wouldn't you know it, but we've actually had a digital threat related to Baby that's been showing up more and more frequently since Help Wanted. That seems to be spreading beyond the confines of its original game and even into the Vanny network in the Pizzaplex. I'm talking about the plush babies. I think that whatever the indie dev made, it has to do with why they keep showing up. So far, I've made what I believe to be a pretty convincing argument that at some point prior to Help Wanted, Scott made the decision to retcon FNaF World from taking place whenever it did in the canon to being an in-universe game that was made after the events of Pizzeria Simulator. But that begs the question, am I saying Scott lied? After all, he said on Reddit that he's only made one retcon in the series' history, and while this would be seamless and carefully done, I'm claiming that this is actually a second retcon. Well, to put it bluntly, no, he didn't lie, because at the time that he made that statement, he'd only made one retcon. He claimed that there was only one retcon on Reddit on September 4th, 2017, but Help Wanted, when he faced the previously mentioned challenge, didn't come out until May 28th, 2019. While I couldn't find when development started on Help Wanted, I want to point out that Pizzeria Simulator only came out 2 months after the initial post was made by comparison. So, up to this point, while this has been a wild ride of a theory, I'd say that it's been mostly hinged. Here's where that stops. Sure, we know what FNaF World is now, but in the midst of all of the lingering questions, such as the flip side, old man consequences, or even who we're playing as, there is only one left here that I want to address before the video ends. The clock ending. By now, I'm sure most of you know about this strange ending, but in case you don't, I'll briefly explain it. If you wait around after talking to Adventure Fredbear for long enough, a weird entity commonly known as Glitchbear will talk to you and send you to find the clock in various parts of the map in order to leave breadcrumbs for him to help him find his way. Every time you interact with the clocks, you play a small minigame that correlates with something you need to do in FNaF 3 in order to unlock the happiest day. At the end of this route, you get a small speech that relates to the ending of FNaF 4, but that particular detail is something that I won't cover today since I'm planning to look a bit deeper into it whenever I eventually make a video over the crying child. Back on topic, the thing that has my attention is the connection between this ending and the happiest day. It already seemed weird before for us to be leaving breadcrumbs that seemed to be the clues needed for the protagonists of FNaF 3 to get the happiest day ending. But that's complicated even further if FNaF World is set after Pizzeria Simulator. Well, I have a question for you. Why are we collecting clocks? Hold on to that question, because we need to talk about what I like to call G.F.I.T.T, or Golden Freddy-Induced Time Travel. In the week before, there are multiple points in which you have an option to use a bonus item. However, on your first read-through, you won't have this, nor will you have any options that will give it to you. Additionally, you'll likely end up realizing that for a book about the phone guy's last week at Freddy's, 1 week before FNaF 1 happens, you seemingly can't leave phone calls for the next security guard and you live past night 4. Eventually, you get a cell phone that belonged to an investigator named Bronwyn, who breaks into and dies in the pizzeria during the course of the week. Ultimately, the good ending happens, resulting in you stopping the animatronics from leaving like they'd planned to and you being confronted by Golden Freddy. And I'll go ahead and read what follows. The Golden Freddy giggles like a mischievous child and keeps staring. You train your eyes on him, forcing yourself not to blink. The recorded announcer starts introducing the animatronics on the stage. Time passes and you think they aren't going to come until you hear their heavy footsteps approach and climb the steps to the stage. You want to watch to make sure they return to their positions, but you dare not look away from Golden Freddy. Can the others see him? You wonder. They're completely ignoring you. Maybe because they figure I'm already dead. Freddy starts singing, Bonnie rocks his guitar, and Chica struts her stuff. You aren't sure it's working, but as the song wears on, and it's one of the longest in the catalog at 7 minutes and 48 seconds, they slow down, slurring their words and getting clumsy. Go home, you're drunk, you think. At the same time, another forceful thought intrudes with, it's me. You see the words in your head. You hear them and you feel them. They hurt. You wince and stagger under the weight of Golden Freddy's mind. Blood trickles from your right nostril. You taste it, salty and metallic on your lips. The song ends and the animatronics fall silent and still. You risk a quick glance to the stage. Their eyes are closed. They're sleeping. You take a deep breath. It worked. You turn back toward Golden Freddy, and he suddenly appears in front of your face, mouth open and screaming. You stagger and fall to your knees. Golden Freddy puts his hands on either side of your head. We, the reader, then get a page that is nothing but the phrase, it's me, repeated with no punctuation, broken up by this paragraph. Just under the angry onslaught of noise, you hear a soft voice, a warm and gentle one, a woman saying, it's me, thank you, you did it, she'll be alright now, she's safe, she's safe. With this voice most likely referring to Ralph's daughter. We then see the phrase, she's safe, drown out the it's me spam before the route ends with one last emphasized she's safe before Ralph smiles and goes to sleep. The book then tells us, the player, now that you have the mobile phone bonus item, empty your inventory of everything but the phone. Tap here, or head to page 2 if you have the physical book, and start over for a brand new adventure. If you do this, you can now use the bonus item options, which will allow you to get the ending that we know, in which recordings are left for the next security guard and Ralph dies on night 5, leaving a recording for the next security guard's 4th night. But here's the issue. That's not Ralph's phone. That's Bronwyn's phone. The only way that Ralph would have this is if Bronwyn already died. We even see this on page 137. You take out your mobile phone. The battery indicator is low. You've been using it intermittently for days and you don't have the right charger for it. Hopefully, it can get you through the rest of the week. This is reinforced by the contacts in it. On page 207, we see this after Ralph first gets the phone. You scroll through the contacts. There are some entries named in codes, like Deep Dish, and others are labeled Backstage, Dining Area, and Restrooms. She's entered the numbers for every phone in the restaurant and home numbers for many of the employees. The last one she dialed is Security Office. Then, on our second playthrough, when we somehow still have this phone, we see that it has contacts for the Security Office, Party Room 2, Backstage, and even Dave and Maintenance, which Ralph considers fortunate with this line on page 66 on night 2. You pull out the mobile phone you found and scroll through the contacts. Fortunately, it has the home number for your buddy Dave and Maintenance. Going back to the first playthrough for a second, Dave even questions how he has this number on page 243 when this happens. Ralph, Dave yawns. This is becoming a habit. How did you get my home number anyway? While even Dave wonders why Ralph would have his home number, this would make sense for Bronwyn to have, since she even calls Ralph's home number as we see on page 235 and 236 with this interaction between Ralph and his daughter. Someone called last night, looking for you. Who? When? She didn't say. She called a minute after you left, hoping to catch you. Did she leave a message? She said she would, and then she hung up. there wasn't a very good connection. So, if Bronwyn hasn't broken into the building and died yet, which happens on night 3, how does Ralph have this phone? As insane as it sounds, I think the answer might be Golden Freddy-induced time travel. Now back to FNaF World. Why are we collecting clocks? While the circumstances are completely different, I think this might be a case of G.F.I.T.T. After all, Glitchbear appears similar to the 1983 version of Fredbear, and while I'm not ready to get into the relationship between Withered Golden Freddy and FNAF 4's Fredbear, there's more of a connection than you'd expect. So what exactly am I suggesting here? That both endings of FNAF 3 are canon. The first time, the happiest day doesn't happen. Then, years down the line, through the events we see in FNAF World's clock ending, the breadcrumbs are placed in the past. From that point on, the happiest day ending now retroactively happens. I know that sounds convoluted, but listen to what Scott said when asked about which ending was canon during his first interview with Dawko on August 8th, 2018, well within what was likely the development period for Help Wanted, which released about 9 months later. At 25 minutes in the video, he says this.
If you can answer this, which ending really happened?
I've given a lot of thought as to whether or not I should answer this question.
Okay.
And I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And the answer is very interesting.
Okay.
You know? The answer is very interesting. The answer is complex.
Okay.
However, I'm not going to answer it because it's only going to cause strife. I mean, you see the kind of trouble that erupts, especially several years ago. The flame wars that would go on over Mangel's gender, something as simple as that. You know.
yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, people with torches and pitchforks. You know. No, I don't think I'm going to answer this one, I'm afraid.
Now, theoretically, a simple the good ending was canon or the bad ending was canon would inevitably cause strife, but that answer isn't necessarily complex. However, what I've suggested, that the clock ending was an act of Golden Freddy-induced time travel that allowed for the past to be changed enough in order to now allow for the happiest day to happen, that is not only very interesting and complex, it would almost certainly cause a ton of strife in the community. Hey, thanks for watching the video. While I wanted to get this video out pretty quickly, there's a good chance that the next couple of theories won't be FNAF related. Withered Golden Freddy theory still needs some time to cook, and I was already planning on taking a little time away to theorize on some other series for a bit. Thankfully, if this video is any indicator, I might be able to start getting these out a bit quicker, assuming I have a theory in mind already. Anyways, that's gonna be all for this one. In the meantime, have a good one, and happy April Fool's Day.